Thank you for your interest in this slide deck. While this deck is designed to speak to Rotarians in Michigan, it provides an excellent explanation on the significance of the damage being done by out-of-control money in our elections and politics. In that sense, this material speaks to all of us. As you are about to see, the tsunami of money in our elections is a direct threat to the civic and economic foundations of our country. The dangerous trend towards pay-to-play politics, practiced on both sides of the aisle, is weakening our ability to talk with each other, solve issues as a society, and sustain an economy where companies compete based on the value they create in the marketplace. The focus of this presentation will not be on politics, but the growing threat of political money on our civic foundations, foundations that are meant to enable peace, prosperity, and human well-being. As a result of our existing activity with a few Rotary clubs across the U.S., we are convinced that Rotarians, with their understanding of the importance of the 8 Pillars of Positive Peace, can play a major role in getting Americans to understand just how important it is to the well-being of our communities and runaway money in our elections. I'll spend a few minutes outlining the problem, and then I'll discuss its significance using Rotary's 4-way test and detail how it is eroding the 8 Pillars of Positive Peace. And finally, I'll discuss some steps that Rotary clubs might take, as well as things individuals might be able to undertake themselves. Oh, one last point. I am Hank Mayers, and I'm pleased to be able to provide this information to you on this very serious problem in America today. Welcome to part 1 of this presentation. Part 1 lays out the data on how rapid has been the growth of election money in America and how it's legalized corruption in our elections, buried the public interest in our governmental policymaking, and fueled new levels of corruption by our elected officials. Election financing starts with the golden rule of elections. The candidates with the most money win. It's not just political lore. The fact is that nearly 90% of successful campaigns have raised the most money. Every election uses the previous winner's expenditure level as the starting point for his or her campaign's financial goals. So with today's unlimited election funding, we are locked into a continuing rise in election fund raising and spending levels. Because our congressional campaigns require so much money, cheapest campaign in Michigan in 20 was $1.2 million. The newly elected congresspersons must immediately turn to building their war chests for the next election. Now remember, for any representative, as opposed to a senator, the next election occurs in 2 years. They have about 16 short months to raise the required cash. So the parties operate call centers in which the representatives must go to raise money. They are placed in a tiny cubicle in a call center, given a party prospect list, and then they blind call for election contributions. If they are in or desire a leadership position, they must also raise considerable money that they must donate to their party. Yes, they are literally purchasing their positions. Money is truly king in our Congress and state legislatures. The call center is the start of what I like to call the tractor beam of obligation to special interests and the donor class. They do this calling nearly 70% of their time. That's the golden portion of this pie diagram. The blue portion shows the time that's left for legislating. You know, the thing we elected them to do. Your newly elected representative has very little time to represent you. If you want to check out the details on this school for corruption, stop the film and check out these web links. The first thing we want you to understand is that election money is literally exploding. Let's look at this graph. The green segments represent the total amount of election money spent to elect congresspersons from the 50 states. The golden segment is the money spent on the presidential elections. In the 2016 election, you can see that the total was just over $6 billion. Still a great deal of money. In 2020, the total exceeded $16 billion. Massive explosion of money. And that count doesn't even include dark money. This slide compares the level of candidate money, the gray bars, with outside national money, which is displayed by the golden bars. As everyone's beginning to learn, non-candidate money or outside money in state elections for Congress is frequently out-of-state money that finances messages that reflect national issues. Those national issues often literally take over the campaign messaging, rounding out states' needs or related local messages. In any event, this graph shows the 10 Senate races that attracted the most outside money. I'd like to point out a few interesting facts from this table. From left to right, the first 6 races are ones where the outside money is larger than the candidate funding. The first group of bars from the left was the North Carolina Senate race, where the outside money was nearly 3 times the candidates. In the 5th group of bars from the left, we can see that in Georgia, while Ossoff raised nearly $250 million in funding, outside sources surpassed even that. As a result, the Ossoff race set a national record of nearly $500 million in funding for a single campaign. This is not a theoretical theory about outside money changing messaging. Here we have David Trahan attesting to the fact that state messaging in Maine was buried in an avalanche of big national money. Even more serious is the fact that big money is now going dark. That is, big donors are keeping their identity secret from us voters. By the way, it's only the voters who are in the dark. Everybody else involved in running a candidate's campaign knows where that money is coming from. Secret or dark money is beginning to dominate Michigan's elections. At $20.8 million, dark money became the biggest class of money in Michigan's 2018 governor's election for the very first time. We all know that too much money and secrecy leads to trouble and corruption. And election and political money is no exemption. So let's go take a look at an example here. Big special interest money in our elections and legislatures results in unnecessarily expensive programs that frequently add to increased taxpayer burden and frequently more governmental debt. A good example is the greed of the drug industry in the development and operation of the drug program in Medicare. To get the program passed, the drug industry insisted that Medicare pay retail prices. You need to understand that no other health insurance program pays retail, none. After the passage, the U.S. retail drug industry pricing steadily grew, totally out of proportion to the cost of living. The pricing of drugs sold in the U.S. quickly became 4 times the cost they charged by U.S. firms in other countries. Now, let's take a look and see the financial impact of this gouging of the U.S. taxpayer. To determine the additional drug costs due to the big pharma money influence in the Medicare Part D program, we calculated the yearly rate of increase in the number of beneficiaries in the program and then the rate of increase in the total costs of claims for brand drugs. Brown bar displays the amount of the change year over year in brand drug total costs, and compared that to the rate of the year-over-year growth in the number of overall drug program beneficiaries. As you can see, many of the years it amounts to a great deal of money. And in fact, the cumulative cost of these disproportionate increases is a $62.6 billion drain on the taxpayer funds over a period of 10 years. Now let's take a look at just a few of the headlines on the politicians that have gotten caught in the web of personal and campaign money corruption in the last couple of years. That is a kind of political hall of shame. So, first up is Lee Chatfield, recent Speaker of the Michigan House of Representatives. Next up is Eric Greitens, past governor of Missouri. Next up after him, Steve Tilley, advisor to that same governor of Missouri. Next up is Larry Householder. He was the Speaker of the Ohio House of Representatives. Then we have Donald Trump's Save America Leadership PAC corruption. And then last but not least, we words from Georgia regarding the corruption between Michael Williams and the insurance commissioner, Jim Beck. Let's now turn to part 2 of our presentation, which focuses on why money in our elections and our politics should be a major concern for Rotarians in the United States. On this slide, we have 2 columns, Rotary's 4-way test on the left and Rotary's Pillars of Positive Peace on the right. The pillars have been developed by the Institute for Economics and Peace out of Australia, and they've been adopted by Rotary International in 2018. As every Rotarian knows, the 4-way test contains the ethical principles that Rotarians live and run their businesses by. And those principles are, is it the truth? Is it fair to all? Will it build goodwill and friendships? And is it beneficial to all? Now, turning to the 8 pillars, first one is a well-functioning government, then a sound business environment, an equitable distribution of resources, an acceptance of the rights of others, good relations with neighbors, free flow of information, high levels of human capital, that is, healthy and capable people, and low levels of corruption. Those 8 pillars, in many ways, when taken together, display the civic institutions or principles, let's call it civic glue, that is necessary for America's freedom, our common purpose, and our prosperity. Now let's take a look at how these pillars reflect Rotary's first test, the truth ethic. Because of this, the 6 pillars cannot succeed without the truth. So a well-functioning government requires the truth. Truth is essential to a sound business environment. Acceptance and honoring the rights of others requires reliable information. Good relations with your neighbor requires honesty. Truth requires the free flow of information on the facts. And low levels of corruption require the truth. So now let's turn to the Rotary ethic of fairness. And how do the pillars reflect that? Well, 4 of the pillars require fairness to be successful. And they are equitable distribution of resources, acceptance of others, good relations with neighbors, and low levels of corruption. The 4 other pillars produce outcomes, or they generate fairness. For instance, the well-functioning government, a sound business environment, the free flow of information, and high levels of human capital. Okay, now we'll go to the ethic of building goodwill and friendships. How do the pillars reflect that? Well, 3 of the pillars require goodwill to be successful. And the first one of that is well-functioning government, a sound business environment, and equitable distribution of resources. 2 of the pillars are literally the methods for spreading goodwill. So we have acceptance of the rights of others and good relations with one's neighbors. Now we're at the last of the 4 ethics, and we want to see how the eight pillars relate to benefits to all. We've got 6 pillars that are related to benefits of all: government programs, sound business environments, equitable distribution of resources, free flow of information, high levels of human capital, and low levels of corruption. So, in summary, the 8 pillars are indeed the infrastructure that take the four-way test principles of Rotary and apply them to the community and society levels. Now let's use those 8 pillars to illustrate the impact of political money in our society. And I'm giving you a warning that it's not an encouraging picture. Regarding acceptance of the rights of others. The goal of big money is to totally overwhelm the voices of regular voters and dominate the messages in an election. As to well-functioning government, Congress and the legislatures are now rife with big money-driven partisan gridlock and fail to address evident needs of the nation. As to sound business environment, pay-to-play legislative ethos produces policies that grant advantage to larger firms and short-run policy changes, seriously impairing business planning. As to equitable distribution of resources, big money by its very nature seeks self-interest and advantage over others, stifling competition and innovation by smaller firms. As to good relations with neighbors, rancor of our elections and politics has reached epidemic levels in campaigns and now infects many members of our communities. As to free flow of information on dark and secret money in our elections does not flow at all and impairs meaningful voting and leads to voter cynicism and apathy. As to high levels of human capital, healthcare industry dominance by insurance coverage continues to leave many Americans with impaired health. As to low levels of corruption, Congress and many state legislatures are awash in special interest money, leading to institutional and personal corruption. So here's our conclusion. Money in our politics is one of the biggest current threats to Rotary's vision and the 8 pillars. Caring about the deteriorating conditions of our 8 pillars is not politics. It's civic action, caring about our communities and nation. Now let's talk about what Rotarians could do. American Promise is the leading cross-partisan organization advancing the charge to win an amendment to our U.S. Constitution. That amendment would end unlimited political spending by individuals, corporations, unions, or special interests. It's one of several critical reforms needed to rebuild our civic and economic foundation. We exist to help empower, inspire, and organize all Americans to put an end to pay-to-play politics across the political spectrum. Our hope is this presentation will inspire you to sign our statement of principles to join the 75% of Americans who agree that this is needed, as well as to sign up to learn more about progress and how you can get involved, and or to host a Democracy in a Box event with Rotaractors or younger folks in your community as a way for them to practice working across generations on civility, civics education, and civic reform. By the way, the group on the right side are a handful of folks delivering to the staff of a New Hampshire congressperson the wording on our amendment. Why is American Promise proposing a constitutional amendment? Well, there are 3 reasons. One is sufficiency. Only an amendment can fully and permanently address this issue. You see, our election money problems are a result of Supreme Court decisions that adhere to their interpretation or presumption that political spending does not cause corruption or the appearance of corruption. No legislation can overturn these decisions. An amendment is needed to supersede their past decisions and restore the right to set reasonable limitations on campaign money. The next reason that we want to do this is precedence. That is, every generation of ours, has passed at least one amendment, including one ratified in 1992. 8 of those amendments have been proposed to overturn Supreme Court decisions that did not reflect the principles held by the American people at that time. These amendments generally happen in turbulent times, and Lord knows this is turbulent, so it's definitely our time. And it's also an opportunity for renewal. This is partly because this effort has to be cross-partisan and reflects shared values. So broad input on the amendment's wording has provided us with a good focus for civility and civic engagement. The American Academy of Arts and Science report of 2020 suggested the amendment could be a core part of a renewal of American democracy. And our group, American Promise, has been conducting cross-partisan town halls for 3 years, gathering input to refining the word of the amendment. There are a number of state and local American Promise groups that are undertaking a variety of educational and motivational efforts to engage as many individuals as possible in this effort. And that effort is to restore our right to set reasonable limits on campaign money and end dark money. By the way, I hope you picked up that I said restore our rights because at one time we had them. Michigan, and by the way, in Michigan, the leader is Michiganders for Fair and Transparent Elections, the organization that I represent. Michigan is currently focused on making legal changes that will require disclosure of election money and messages by everyone or every organization engaged in election. No more money. Excuse me, no more dark money. We're also about strengthening campaign finance oversight. Our third purpose and focus is to educate and prepare Michigan citizens and the legislature for the enactment of the U.S. constitutional amendment when it is passed by Congress and then referred to the states, and in this case, our state legislature in Lansing, who will be asked to ratify it. Finally, at the current time, the primary vehicle that we're using to activate the people of Michigan on this topic is to get local passage of a resolution known as People Must Govern, Not Money. In that sense, we're trying to make sure that the people speak and the legislature hears them. Rotary and American Promise have established a very natural partnership, and it goes back to 2018. There are 2 Rotary clubs already currently championing the 8 Pillars of Positive Peace and are working on educating their communities on the negative impacts of unregulated election money on the health of our communities. There are 6 American Promise chapters that are seeking out and making presentations to local Rotary clubs on this issue, like this one. This slide deck and other materials have been developed by a formal joint working committee between Rotary and American Promise, and they're being used by both groups on this campaign. As you ponder this opportunity to take action, there are 2 important things to keep in mind. First, this is not a matter of politics or partisan activity. It's about the well-being of our communities. Further proof that it's not a political matter is that it is a proven nonpartisan issue. Poll after poll in the last 22 years have demonstrated that this is a nonpartisan issue. In 2015, there was a survey to get people's reading on how important this matter is, and they found that 84% of independents felt that money had too much influence. They found that 90% of Democrats felt that money has too much influence. And 80% of Republicans also felt that money had too much influence in our elections. Keep in mind now, these numbers have not significantly changed over the years. So what might civic advocacy leadership look like? Beyond endorsing our amendment to the Constitution, there are things that can be done, and what would it look like for Rotarians? First of all, there's an opportunity for individuals to get involved. You can personally engage in the issue. You can sign up to be on a mailing list for a newsletter. You can volunteer to help out. There's lots to do. You can consider donating money, and you can share your concerns with family, friends, and associates. And you could join the effort to pass the local governmental resolutions that I mentioned earlier. There are actions that the club could consider. Your club can set up a study group to consider your options, as there are many. And in that regard, you could contact us and we would be happy to provide you with further information. We can also put you in touch with other clubs that have taken important cooperative actions to inform their community. Now on this slide are 5 different websites that you can consult with in terms of getting additional information. The top 2 are American Promise. The third and fourth one are the programs within Rotary that you could find more information about. And the last one is information about what we're doing here in Michigan with Michiganders for Fair and Transparent Elections. Regardless of what actions you might take on this issue, thanks for your interest and commitment to the well-being of your community.